Yeah, man. Well, just want to say thank you for coming on here and sharing your time. I know that you're very busy in your life with spiritual commitments and your new projects that you're doing. And yeah,
Mm,
it's been great to weave a nice relationship over the last month or so. And
mhm.
very very excited to have you here on the podcast and to see where this kind of what we can open up and talk about. So maybe you can
Mhm.
just give an introduction to people out there, um, who you are, where you come from, your lineage, your background.
Yes, Adrian Primeaux. My family name Primeaux is a French issued name. So along the Missouri River is where the Yankton Sioux and the Unca Omaha tribes were a plains culture, but semi-woodland. They had nomadic culture living in teepees, but they also had what they call earth lodges at one time. And so in my area, that French ending was really common. So my family name is Primo. 5 generations before me, they have a pretty well tracked and well documented account of medicine people, spiritual practitioners, and my dad's side and my my dad's mother's side as well. And then a couple generations of practitioners on my mother's side of plant medicine spiritual practitioners. And so that's my English name and native name. Doksha Chikala Okshila is my name that I was given by my grandfather. That word Itoksha means that it was a contrary. So Shunka is a dog, but it refers to the wolves and the coyotes. So that Itoksha is the wolves and the coyotes. So we're our coyote boy. That's where our songs come from. They came from the inspiration of the coyote and the wolf. So that was given to me by my father's dad, who was a medicine man. And I always like to use the explanation of family lineage and the 7 generations. I always try to open with that as an introduction because it tells a broader story of who we all are. We we are the representation of our parents, grandparents, their value system, their stories, their teachings. And then free will, we choose to pick up our own modalities as the men who we are as individuals. Adrian, Primo, Wade, what we choose to be. What modalities did we choose to pick up? And the last little detail on that is we represent the 7 generations. So parents above us, grandparents above us would be the inverted triangle, as above, so below. Our grandparents are many, our grandmothers and grandfathers. And we are going to be affecting our children below us, great grandchildren, great great grandchildren below us. And our great grandchildren are going to be many. And essentially, who we are is where we represent this 7 generations is above, so below is what we all represent. And I like to use that analogy because we understand that our children are going to live through us. And so when I look at my children, I take delight because I see them learning to sing and I see them learning to stories and language. And in my mind, I feel that my modalities, my teachings of my forefathers are going to live on through my children. So it makes me smile because it's different when we think about what are my goals as one person? What are my beliefs as one person? What do I want to achieve as one person? When that's really limited, when we think about just what can I personally gain for myself? Whereas as fathers, we understand everything we gain is honoring our grandparents and honoring our grandchildren. Everything we learn is honoring our forefathers and wanting to prepare our children for the future. Everything we do is about this full spectrum of generations. So I like to begin with that because it helps us to get out of the individual mind and get into the collective mind when we think about how much of an impact even this work you and I are doing in the online education space, because these documented accounts are going to live on way beyond us.
Mm.
Our grandchildren might someday pick up the phone and say, check it out, look at my grandpa, what he's talking about. I like to use that analogy. That's who I am. I'm a value system, my forefathers, and hopefully a value system that's going to live way beyond me.
Mm.
That's a bit about who I am.
Yeah, man. Thank you for sharing that. And would you say, like, carrying on from that, that is like one of the main pillars, or the main kind of indigenous mindsets of how to live life, is that you are in the center of that kind of hourglass, of previous generations and future generations, and in that way you're always like honoring the ancestral, and always, like praying or ensuring that things are getting better for future generations.
Yes, absolutely. That would be one of the main frames of life, one of the main philosophies. I think that it's a good balance of concepts of time. Say, for example, when we are in school, we think about linear time. When you get to school, it's 7:30. And when you get out, it's 2:30. And then therefore we operate within the boundaries of lines.
Mm.
Whereas this concept of as above, so below, beyond time and space. So when you look above you, your ancestry, you're still connected to your parent, connected to your forefathers energetically. And when we look at our children and our great grandchildren, we can almost feel and predict what life is going to be like for them energetically,
Mm.
based off of how we're living and the healing that takes place within us. I would say that's a core difference in intuitive cultures like the indigenous, who live in sync with the land and the animals, the planet, the sky, the moon cycle, the seasons, always wanted to be in sync with that. I would say that that is a core pillar of life philosophy about this generational knowledge, always wanting to be mindful of the unseen. I think even I would argue that the unseen world is way more important than the seen world. And that is a book that I wanted to discuss today that came to mind as I was thinking about this conversation between me and you. Thought came to mind about thinking about the intuitive brain, and then looking at life as unseen holograms. I like that as an exercise because I've been joining in a few conversations about belief systems, and told you a story about a conversation I had with an individual who disagreed with some things that I was saying.
Mm.
And he was really, I guess you can say, I guess you can say, in a grapple, a mental grapple with something that I said, and explained to him that I'm just a hologram, I'm not real. And when you look at life that way, surprisingly, a lot of doorways unlock when you look at yourself as being just energy and just being light.
Mm.
And just for the simple fact that we're co-creating with the universe, our reality right now is spinning as a mental construct. So if I were to look at this screen that I'm observing, a picture of Bobby Wade in the screen, but that's a mental construct existing in my mind. I'm making you real.
Mm.
I'm making the concept of you real, acknowledging you, putting a face to the name, and you are very real. You are very real because I'm choosing to acknowledge you as real. And so therefore other things could be argued in that same argument, we could argue that whatever we perceive as real is real, and whatever we perceive as not real could be argued the same in the opposite direction. And not to say that we should be, discounting universal principles, not to say that we should be discounting things that are a threat to us, say, in the news and in politics, not to say that we shouldn't acknowledge the hard things that are going on in the world today,
Hmm.
but to say that we are co-creating and we are manifesting things, and it's just a matter of perspective. And I always like to use the analogy of we could look at the glass as half empty or the glass as half full. It's just a mental construct on how we're choosing to frame it. So those kind of go together, the seven generations principle, the unseen world, and then the concept of us perceiving the world as also being spiritual more than it is physical, and framing the world as a lot of unseen universal principles. It's a good way of finding truth, because then we test our principles against the fabric of reality when it comes to spiritual principles, seven generations principles when it comes to the analytical brain, the intuitive brain, the masculine, the feminine, light and dark, good and bad, glasses half empty, glasses half full. It's a good way of finding truth whenever we test them against things as not being seen, not being real all the time, because like growing up, guys like us, when we go to the mainstream education spaces, those concepts that you just mentioned about indigenous philosophy, those are might as well be mythology, in the category of mythology.
Hmm.
Oh, these creation stories aren't real, or animals can't talk, or plants can't talk. That's mythology. All of those things take a backseat. And fast forward to now, as we start to dive into this world of meditation and spirituality and prayer, you know, fire gazing, acknowledging the star as real, acknowledging plants as human, acknowledging the earth as alive and mother. When we look at the world in those frames, so much, like I said, so many doors open for us when we just choose to walk through those doors. And so I would say by just acknowledging the concrete and the physical only, we're just looking at doorways off in the distance and just choosing not to ever go through them. And I know that's a long answer, but I really enjoyed, speaking about these topics about indigenous philosophy and exploring ideas in real time. And I try to speak from the heart. I try not to plan.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's
Apologies for
cool.
the long answer.
Um, how much would you say of what you just said comes from, like personal experience? I'll give an example, something I mentioned to you before this podcast. I was in the ceremony on the weekend and I learned this new song, and it was a bird song and it was about balance, and I started singing it and I felt automatically this balance, come into my life more. And I could acknowledge that energy and kind of witness that. But if someone had just told me that that was something that worked, these songs, or they have the vibration or the ability to move things, I see it as like a little different in if you're not putting it into practice. Like how much would you say it's important to immerse yourself in these natural worlds? Like build a fire, sit with a fire. So many elders have told me everything that you need to know, all the answers are in the fire. And that's strange when you hear that the first time, but then when you start sitting with that fire, you start understanding. Same as, I guess, anything, meditation, any practice that you do, you need that physical kind of action or practice, right?
Hmm. Yeah, to reframe the question, would it be how important is it to have these practices of, sitting in meditation with like the unseen world
Like
and
how important,
elements?
yeah, how important is it to build these relationships. Build a relationship with the water, build a
Hmm.
relationship with the fire, build a relationship with nature.
Yes, I would say in importance wise, it's going to be key for the future. It's really important because the world has been growing for the past couple centuries on completely ignoring these elements, such as the rivers, the oceans, the elements, the fire, the earth, completely ignoring it as inanimate objects that don't have any meaning, any data to tell us, nothing to teach us. And indigenous people have always done that first, have always raised children with that first understanding that if you were a young boy and I was going to raise you to be a hunter and to be a scout and to be a brave, then I would argue that that would be the most valuable foundation to start, acknowledging these elements as alive, because then they're going to teach you and they're going to speak to you. And as I developed a relationship with plant medicines, for example, one of the first instructions that my father gave me when we were sitting in ceremony, he was starting to coach me, preparing me to start facilitating these in the fashions of my forefathers. And the first instruction he gave me was, son, when this medicine comes around, he said, don't just take and pass it. He said, you stop and he said, you speak to it and you tell it what you're seeking, what you need. He said, it'll give it to you. It'll listen to you if you talk to it. He said, so don't ever let it pass you talking to it and acknowledging it, because how you are with it is how it's going to be with you.
Mm,
And I would say that's why this isn't so important to develop these relationships with the fire and the water and the earth, the winds, because if you acknowledge them, they're going to acknowledge you in return. And so
mhm,
if we don't acknowledge them, who's to say that these things won't? It'll be too late by the time we get to a point in history or in life when we really need something. And say resources ever get, scarce, or, say when the forests, start to get exploited and we don't have a forest, like in some of the movies that they talk about how what's
mhm,
going to happen when there's no trees. And then we're going to want to try to have a prayer with these elements when it's too late.
mhm,
And so in ancient times, all of our ancestors always acknowledged that these things were alive and that we needed a relationship because they spoke to us in terms of the language of the heart. And so in indigenous people, that was the 101. That was the foundation of everything. Always acknowledge your kin. Hence the term mitakuye oyati. We're all one, we're all related, we're all kin. Mitakuye means relatives, my relatives. And going forward in the future, that's going to be how important it is the the underdeveloped the underdeveloped quadrants of understanding. So many of our people are intuitively seeking it out,
mm,
and it's always been oral history. It's never been a point to write it down, and
mhm,
a lot of the ceremonial knowledge, for example, was never written. It
mhm,
was you pay attention and you make sure that you catch on by osmosis. Otherwise, you're not going to learn it. And now I'm in a position to where I understand the importance of hands-on learning,
mhm,
but then I understand that a lot of the things that I had the honor and the privilege to learn, a lot of times I was able to review it through a record of some kind. When it comes to songs, for example, my first songs that I've ever learned was a recording from my dad.
mm,
I would have, probably delayed my learning if I didn't have a record of it. So a lot of these things that are being documented now are really going to be valuable and moving forward into the this global education space.
mhm,
Me or you could flip on our phone and we could learn any skill that we want. The phone. We could Google, we could ask. for any knowledge and we could pretty much get it.
Yeah.
But one of the underdocumented knowledge is this knowledge that me and you're talking about, which is the relationship with the fire, relationship with the elements, that intuitive language. A lot of it can only be learned in person by osmosis, by
Mm.
emulating and mirroring and catching on to the nuances. But a good amount of the foundations, I think we could ethically start sharing on video and books. And moving forward in the future, there's going to be so many people out there who are seeking, intuitively seeking earth-based spiritual knowledge,
Mm.
not knowing where to go. And I think that's where we're going to come in is having a resource, ethical resources for these people to come and, say a boy from the city, for example, he's raised in, concrete, no nature around, but if he wanted to, he could open up his phone and Google spirituality, and he's going to be able to find a lot of things. Mother nature, he's going to be able to find a lot of things that are going to be a foundation for him to learn more. But moving forward in the future, it's going to be really important because we're getting to critical times in history where technology is going to be exponentially increasing and facing a meta crisis. I've been speaking about this a lot. Multifaceted problem that the the core of these problems were a deficiency in the spirituality quadrant. The intuitive quadrant is underdeveloped. So therefore, when humanity is growing and humanity is developing its mental constructs, that's always a weak point in our fabric.
Mhm.
And so this is going to be really, really key going forward here in the next digital age. We're approaching an artificial intelligence era, and I have a lot to say about that new era of man and this new era of technology.
Yeah, I appreciate like what you do for that space, like blending your indigenous and like your ancestral knowledge that you've learned from your previous generations and different elders, and blending that on certain platforms, and
Mm,
looking at ways in which you can offer education in like ethical ways which can support people in day-to-day life.
mhm,
Obviously there's ceremonies and practices and things that are just you cannot record, right? But there are things that can be shared and
mm,
I feel are necessary to be shared right now for our own survival because we are getting to that point of
mm,
um, sink or swim,
mhm,
within reality because there's so much disconnect. So many people have lost a connection to, a lot of people can't even trace back their ancestry, 4 generations. Like
mhm.
they're down to like maybe 2 generations. So I think it's really, really important, and that's what one of the things I appreciate of the work that you're doing right now. Um, from from an indigenous like point of view, how do you see that? How you see that playing out, like the work that you're doing? How do you guide or how do you navigate those two worlds? One being the natural, the unseen world, the ceremonial world, and then the other one being like this, how we're talking right now, like the AI technology world.
Mhm. I see it playing out better now than it would have, say, 20 or 30 years ago. So, say if it was my grandparents' era,
Mm.
it would be really rejected, and it's getting easier for my community, indigenous communities to accept more digital learning.
Mhm.
And as I move forward with this type of work, it was really hard for me to see how it could play out in the beginning because I was so immersed in, I guess you could say, more simpler ways of viewing this type of work. It was so used to just, like for example, one I was raised to hold a job, and I was raised to live within the constructs of society. So, like many of us, our parents are want you to get a good job, and I want you to go to school, and want you to save money and build your credit, so that you could eventually buy a house, and
Mhm.
then in addition to that, going to ceremonies, one of the common things that you see in ceremonies is when it comes to working with certain spiritual entities, they always say, the spiritual entities, they don't resonate well with the electronics. And so like when you go in a ceremony, the old school, when you're in a celebratory setting, they kind of welcome documenting and pictures and phones. But when you're in a serious setting, when there's somebody who needs help, really needing help within their health, for example, and it's like a life and death situation,
Mm.
they really want to do it right. And so the spiritual leaders are, we have to rely upon the spirit guides, and we have to rely upon these holy beings. And they don't resonate well with these electronics. And so a lot of the electronics were frowned upon. And as I move forward, I see electronics and documentation being welcomed more, but at the same time, I always try to be mindful of how looks could be deceiving as well.
Mhm.
And so for me, I'm always trying to just rely upon a good balance of wanting to do a lot of things in person and understanding that certain things should only ever be taught in person.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that the more that we implement these things ourselves, I think it'll be even more accepted. So as I move forward teaching a lot of spirituality online, uh, a lot of it feels foreign because of those old programming. But thankfully, there's a lot of people out there who have made a good example of what's an appropriate way to teach online.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of spiritual speakers, there's a lot of like really, really well to do, loving, and heart led people out there who are speaking on different religions, different things that are normally like just within church or ceremony or home. And they're starting to be comfortable sharing it online. And they're finding good results. So that's kind of like promising for me is like, would my words be twisted? Would it be exploited? Would people receive it negatively? And as I move forward, I'm realizing that there's a lot of good ways to share spirituality, but then there's also a balance to understanding that we also want to encourage people to go meet people in person too.
Mm.
And I think a good example that I would use is men's work. For example, I had the honor to attend men's retreat healing work, and we left our phones. We left our phones out of the healing work, and that in person, the potency of in person healing work is so irreplaceable. And because we're so used to being on social media all the time, scrolling, messaging friends and family, we get used to that. And so, therefore, a lot of times we would, just get by with just calling friends as opposed to just like, hey, man, I really want to see you. Like, I want to go visit you. And as we move forward, I would really, really try to be careful and not overindulging in electronics.
Mm.
But also understanding that it also has to be a practice too. So I'll get used to speaking on camera, for example, and transferring a vibration. And I really think that that's possible. I could feel somebody's good vibe, good love, good energy through the screen. So it's important for me to practice doing digital work because then I get better at transferring energy, transferring vibration, and uh, transferring a philosophy in a good emotional way so people feel the emotion of it. Um, but for me moving forward, I feel like there's ways to have digital events that really impact lives, but then I don't ever want that to replace in-person work either. Also want to encourage, even myself in ways to everything that I do digitally. I also want to try to find ways to do it in person so that we don't over rely upon the electronics.
Hmm.
And circle back to one closing thought on that is I remember one of my grandfathers explaining that these computers, one of my grandfathers, my dad's dad, he had an intuitive download on one of his vision quests, and he said that with the rise of the internet, right about that time, computers and the internet was becoming a thing.
Hmm.
And he said that what he received, a message was that that we had to be careful because within this world wide web, that there was also some trickery in there, that there was something that was wanting to deceive, wanting to lead us to believe something that wasn't the truth. So the message was that we have to be really, really careful on what we receive as well as truth, because false ideas could be spread and we could take that as fact. And I also like understand that, we have to be really, really careful too with what we consume, whether that be propaganda, whether that be news, of whatever the case may be, not to take everything as fact, that we have to really, really judge from the heart and really, really test our principles against reality. And a closing example of that would be I've been speaking with people from June to this past September. I've been speaking with people one on one. So I do a presentation and then say, anybody have any questions? And then they would come up and we'd visit. And then these people were really well natured, and I'd be speaking with groups of 40 people 3 times a day. And then these people were really humble, really nice, really receptive, and we're in person. And then as I would finish up the day, I never encountered anybody who came up to me and was like angry you know, or came up to me with negative feedback. Everybody was really nice. And I would be talking about earth-based spiritual principles, creation stories, things like that. And then as I would shake hands with hundreds and hundreds of people, families, elders, young people, overseas, wherever, from China, all over. And I would tell people, I was like, I've met all good people from all over the world. And if I look at people in person, they were all really well natured.
Hmm.
And so the closing message on that is if I only believed what I seen in social media, I would assume that humanity is going south and that there's no hope. Like we're, there's just too much bad out there in the world for us to have hope. We're done. Like, but as I look at humans, I'm like, man, as I look at a human in person, they're so nice, so warm, so welcoming, so quick to embrace people. I would tell everybody that I talk to, you know what? I think humanity is going up. I think humanity is well, thriving, and improving from what I see it with my own two eyes. I said if I got consumed with propaganda, I might think that humanity is not doing well.
Hmm.
And I think that's a good example of if we also got to be careful with what we consume, because something that the screen could be deceiving you as well. And so just being always wanting to have good uh, heartfelt judgment, intuitive judgment on what we receive and what we want to believe, and what we want to take as fact and reality. So the future of digital experiences, I think, is going to grow, and I think people are going to improve upon creating a digital experience. So I see it improving, but then I also want to be really careful too, so that we don't get people too lenient on what they see and what they believe from these voices online as well. And just to recap again, got really lost with it in the beginning. I felt kind of overwhelmed with it, but now I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of enthusiasm about this work that we're doing now,
Hmm.
because it allows for situations like this to take place. This would never take place if we never had social media, if we never had these phones, if we never had a global. And before we close today, I do want to talk a little bit about what I mentioned earlier, which was the meta crisis and what our place in that work is, and then the five determining factors that's going to determine success or
Hmm.
lack of success before we conclude.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think, like I've heard that before, from another elder talking about this technology is it's a spirit that wants to infiltrate into humanity, into like our consciousness, and it's not
Mm,
always like with the best intentions. And
mhm,
I mean, I guess you can relate it to nature in a way. I mean, when you have a fire, it has so much um, positive things around it. Like when you look at a fire or night, like you're on a cellular level, you're healing yourself, you're hydrating your cells, it's
mhm,
regulating your nervous system. It's giving you warmth. You can cook with it. It's protecting you. It's giving you light. But at the same time, like if a fire can take your life. I mean, you
mm,
can be burnt to death. You can suffocate from the smoke. Yeah, so it's really learning and respecting
mhm,
that power. We've created this new technology, and we have to really take care of it. We can't be opening Pandora's box, and I'm still
mm.
not sure if AI is that Pandora's box, but
Yeah.
what I like to believe is that you know the natural intelligence of the world will always prevail. And
Mhm,
yeah, I appreciate that reminder, to walk carefully, not to believe everything we see online,
mm. Yes.
because AI, deep fakes, all that, it's coming out and it's making it harder to distinguish. But I know when I go
Mhm,
outside, I know that's real. Like you're saying at the beginning, like I choose to believe that's real. Like I know that tree is real. Like I know that the sun is warming me. That's truth. So
mhm,
finding that truth in day-to-day life. One thing I wanted to get onto, and yeah, that'd be great to talk about the meta crisis in a little bit.
mhm,
Is the course that you have on your community, your school community, which we'll put the links in the podcast notes too.
mhm,
I feel like in a way, like you are being able to analytically bring forward teachings in a different way and put them into form, which maybe in previous generations it would be in person, talking face to face or observing, like you're saying in
mhm,
ceremony, watching things and experiencing it. But you talk about like the nervous system, feathers, all these things. I feel like you've been able to like put that in, encapsulate it into like let's say a container where people can maybe understand it from a different perspective. And one of the things that you say in your course, feathers and frequency, is the body is an antenna. Maybe you can explain like in a simple language, like what does that mean? Like the body is an antenna.
Absolutely. I love this conversation because this is something that has sparked my excitement and that that joy of teaching. This is like one of the topics that has really helped me to manifest a lot of good things in life and helped me to understand prayer, helped me to understand the concept I mentioned earlier about us us spinning and churning this reality and us manifesting and how we essentially we are a hologram. We're these light beings, we're bioluminescent beings. And I always liked hearing the term attunement, and that applies to this body of being an antenna. So first off, when we look at a feather headdress, we look at all of these cultures across the world. They always had some form of headdress. For example, the kings of, European ancestry would have the gold crown. And the Trojans would have, the horsehair headdress. The chiefs would wear the feather headdress. South American tribal chiefs would have the feather headdress. And when we wear these different headdress, the people who were in leadership were in charge of making decisions, always trying to make the right intuitive decision because we can't predict the future. So we'd have to go based off of what the gut tells you, the sixth sense. And I was really always trying to make sense of the intuitive world in analytical terms, and I think that's a good way to frame this. So by being an antenna, long story short, is that because we're light beings and because we're these molecular structures, we are these, I guess you could say, atomic structures that are spinning a ball of energy, uh, many billions of them put together into making a form that you see here. When we have certain emotions, we're spinning at a balanced, harmonious. Your heart rate is slowed when you're calm and when you're peaceful. When you're happy and joyful, your heart rate is pumping harmoniously. But when you're angry and you're fearful and you're stressed out, your heart rate starts to get irregular, starts to beat out of rhythm. And so all scientific knowledge would tell you that your heart has electricity in it, and that heart is pumping a flow of blood around the body. And so when we think about the biofield, I think that would be uh, a simpler way of explaining how we're an antenna. So a biofield is this magnetic cycle of energy that's flowing out of your crown chakra, flowing below you into your earth chakra, and flowing in and out like this.
Mm.
And when your heart is in coherence, as I mentioned in my course, when it's pumping calm and your breathing is slowed, that rhythm compounds on itself. So the more that it's in harmony, that field starts to grow because it's synchronizing with itself.
Mhm.
As opposed to if your heart rate was always in fear or always in stress, that irregular beat it's gonna emit a biofield radiance. But then if it skips a beat, that radiance is gonna shrink because it's irregular. But when it's beating in coherence, that field grows because it's like I guess you could say like momentum. If
Mhm.
you had a pendulum that's swinging, if I knock it away, it's gonna get all over the place and it's not gonna. But if it has momentum, it's gonna swing harder and harder in one direction. Um, Kind of like I guess you could say like if you're riding a bike downhill, you have that momentum. That's how the biofield will be. If it has momentum, that spiritual momentum, it's gonna continue to grow and expand around you. And if your body has that code for heart brain coherence, and you're always operating in peace, love, joy, happiness, bliss, fulfillment, your energetic tune, your attunement is going to be able to attract the same like a magnet. And but if your body is wired like so many of our indigenous people were wired for trauma,
Mm.
they coded into their DNA, they attract more hard times, more anger, more resentment, relationships fall apart, um, gossiping takes place, betrayal takes place, and addictions manifest into your life, where there were all kind of different addictions. And my point in saying that isn't to say that indigenous people are all that way, but a lot of the traumas that exist within these impoverished communities are a result of that attunement. And so the body is essentially this large antenna because of that biofield.
Mm.
Whether you're attuned for stress, anger, um, or if you're attuned for calm, bliss, love, joy,
Mm.
um, your frequency, and they have ways of measuring that frequency. For example, uh, why I titled the course Feathers and Frequency is because when we go on a vision quest, for example, you're releasing the wants of the body, which bring you into a 3D vibration. But when you no longer want what the body wants, such as, say, sweet food or whatever, dopamine is your body's seeking for, the spirit starts to wake up.
Mm.
And so when your spirit starts to wake up, that's a high frequency. And so just like an antenna, like a cell phone, high frequency of an LTE cell tower, your spirit could receive those high frequency messages from
mm,
your spirit guides.
mm,
And so in terms of frequency, you're an antenna that's attracting either low vibrations or high vibrations, depending on how you wire your brain and your what they call embodiment, depending on what you're embodying as terms of wiring for fight or flight or for safety and happiness. And that's a kind of a thankfully that's a well documented concept. And I've always tried to pair those two worlds together. Um, and I mentioned how I would always contemplate in my mind, why is it that we do this? Why is it that we are always trying to, I guess you could say operate in patterns, and why is it we're always trying to use feathers, whether wearing them, dancing with them, holding them in our hands, wearing them in our regalia, or putting them on top of a staff, or why is it that we use these things so much? But nobody would ever explain it. It was just a part of the culture. And so as a young, say, practitioner, I would look at these things from afar and I would just copy, um, because that was our way of life. But I would never ask. And but as I started getting older, and because I was always encouraged to get an education, I've always tried to put a explanation on these things growing up. And I think that was something that was really key to my upbringing was education, for example. So like, at a young age, my parents were um discouraged us from, enrolling into like career paths, but they always wanted us to get the educational path. So for example, I probably could have went to the military because my father was a soldier boy. He was a veteran.
mm,
But I remember him saying, I didn't enlist into the military, and but I would rather you boys, how he said it in his word, I would rather you boys get an education, and
mm,
I would rather you be safe. Like that was just the father in him wanting to protect us. And of course, if I would have joined the military, he probably would have supported me. Um, but he always wanted us to go down the intellectual path. But once I had that foundation of being encouraged to practice my culture and to practice education, I always tried to put the analytical world, as you said, and pair it with the intuitive world because I was so fascinated by it. And there was some part of me where I always wanted to be able to explain it to my friends too,
mm,
because I had lived in modern settings where my mom was from the West Coast. So I lived in like bigger cities.
mhm,
And I had a lot of friends who were non-native, who were different nationalities, and like they'd seen me as a native, but they didn't know anything about my reservation life. So I'd always try to find ways to like help them to appreciate where I came from. Um, so I always tried to find ways in which to package it so that people could receive it.
mhm,
And that applies to other areas outside of the feathers, for example, when it came to plants, when it came to ceremony, when it came to universal principles, and even things like creation stories. So I'd always tried to like explain that this is what the symbols of the creation story means. Whereas if you heard the story, it would sound like a children's story, like our creation story. If you hear it, you would say, "How is that possible?" I don't think that's literally possible. And I always wanted to help people to appreciate these stories by saying, "Well, the characters are symbols.
mm,
This is a riddle. This is like poetry. If you read poetry, you're not going to take every word, as fact or literal. They're metaphors, symbols, and analogies. So that kind of like applies as well to like creation stories. I always try to find a way of explaining it. So to put the human body as an antenna, to put that into four sentences, the body is an antenna in terms of high and low frequencies. And the body is also an antenna when we wear the headdress,
mhm,
even more so. And then when the body lets go of earthly bodily wants, the the metaphysical components of the heart's electric charge is attuned to receive messaging, intuitive downloads, dreams, and knowledge if we were to attune this big antenna of the body.
Hmm.
We're tuned to receive more guidance in life and more direction
Mm.
in life when we look at our body as a antenna.
What would you say is like for people listening, some of the best practices, maybe some simple steps in which people can attune more this frequency inside themselves, that they can flow better, that they're feeling these negative emotions, they can come back into harmony and be more in that joy, happiness, kind of like calm state.
Mm, absolutely. So the first one would be to rewire your body and your mind, and that's like lifting weights. So whenever you lift weights, for example, you have to build it fiber by fiber. So if you're doing curls, you're one muscle fiber at a time,
Hmm.
and then repeat it over consistently over the course of months. That starts to build. Those fibers are wired one at a time, and so it's the same with attunement, rewiring your body and your mind intentionally. So one common practice would be meditation, but there's also certain styles of meditation. I would I would say to start small. So like if you were lifting weights, I would lift weights enough to where you felt comfortable repeating it. Because if you went into a full professional workout from having not done any working out at all, you're going to get overwhelmed, and
Hmm.
it's going to be an overload for your body, for your capacity. And what I try to preach to people is make it simple and doable so that you could just do it every day and you could just set the system and forget it. And um, in terms of the atomic habits, is it's make it frictionless so that you can or pair it with something you already do. So a simple actionable plan would be to play a guided meditation before bed when you lay down to rest at night, and
Hmm.
to play it a short one right when you wake up. Um, because you're already laying down, and before life hits you, you intentionally start your day with that, and then intentionally end your day before you rest into the uh, intuitive dream world,
Mm.
to set that intention and plant that seed. And that would be like one of the more simple ones. But then there's also more ways to attack this rewiring process. So one of them is to write down internal dialogue via journaling.
Hmm.
So when you track your internal dialogue, you can kind of learn what's going on in your internal ecosystem.
Mm.
And if there's something that's heavy, expressing it as opposed to stuffing it down and burying it is a more, I guess you could more as a healthy way of processing your internal ecosystem. So if you have anger for, say, a relationship problem, if you stuff it, that's not getting down to the root of it, but it writing it down, and then once you express the negative emotions, writing down, rewriting the new intentions for your future. So if I was angry and I experienced hardship in life, express how that made me feel, the emotions, sadness, resentment, expressing that, but then trying to intentionally tap into the new version of myself would be an actionable way of reprogramming yourself. So, for example, an affirmation that I have in my meditation, and I repeat it periodically throughout the day, is my mind is the center for divine operations. That which exists in me is that which finds a way, truth, and light.
Mm.
Um, so I repeat that in my meditation, and then it helps it to iron that into my brain, so that becomes a part of my wiring. Um, like that's a voice going on repeating in my mind that I'm all capability. My mind is the center for divine operations. Um, instilling that belief in myself that I have the ability to manifest all of these things by choice.
Mhm.
And again, that's going back to the beginning of our conversation when I said we're manifesting and we're creating this by choice.
Mhm.
And if we intentionally choose to rewire for an embodied, uh, healthy, happy person, um, you can't help but to attract synchronistic experiences in life. that even goes with leadership. For example, for me, because I've been putting in a lot of reps in meditation and prayer, um, my body kind of just knows what to do without me having to think about it.
Mhm.
Uh, because it was wired into my body, and that's what I meant earlier by embodying the characteristics that you want to lead with and that you want to create with, whether you're leading your family, you're leading yourself, you're leading your group, whether you're leading a ceremony, whether you're a speaker, your body language will speak louder than what the mind can do.
Hmm.
But embodiment takes time. It's like building a muscle. So I would say those are two of the main actionable ones: is the the bedtime and the wake up short meditation, even if it's just 3 minutes.
Mhm.
Um, because even for me, um, life is so busy that if I don't do it when I wake up and when I go to sleep, I probably won't have time to do it.
Yeah.
Um, so making it actionable and frictionless so that you feel like doing it. And then the internal dialogue of expressing your internal ecosystem, like expressing that so you know what's actually going on and what needs attention. And then the internal dialogue becomes a part of your habit and your programming. Um, but of course, there's other extensive ways in which to double down on that. So doing longer uh, meditations is like a way of increasing that.
Mhm.
But if somebody was just starting out, I would say use the frictionless. But if you're advanced and you already do meditation, then that's when you can jump into deeper meditation. That's when you can jump into even more advanced programming practices. For example, they have guided meditations that come with the light goggles, where even the flashing of lights helps your subconscious program. And then listening to what they call um, your I think they call it your dream story.
Mhm.
So some people will record a story of what their life looks like in 3 years. Um, health, wealth, happiness, everything that you want, and then they'll record a story of it and they'll play that and they'll listen to it like 3 times a day. So things like that are advanced ways
Mm.
which people who are already doing meditation to even program themselves even further. Um, and then of course, attunement is just by osmosis as well, by surrounding yourself with people who are already practicing heightened frequencies, just by osmosis, just by hanging out with people who are positive, happy, healthy. um, your body starts to download that as well. Um, so there's probably a longer list that we could go into, but I would say those are the easiest ones. Um, but there's really, really advanced technology, and um, Joe Dispenza, I always try to recommend people read some of his works, because he's at the cutting edge of this attunement research and psychology of it.
Mhm.
I would consider myself to be a novice when it comes to, like, subconscious programming, but I know enough to where I could honestly tell you that it works. It definitely works. There's no question about it. Um, and so just say that to say there's other ways to research it too. So if you were to Google how to reprogram your subconscious, really, really try to do it. Really try to find a way to reprogram yourself, because you're gonna thank yourself in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. And when you see all of these beautiful things manifesting into your life, it
Mm.
was because you took the time to 3 minutes in the morning, 3 minutes at night to reprogram and rewire your brain toward a higher self.
Yeah.
And the last little bit I'll share is when I mentioned earlier about this concept of time and how it's not linear, you're connected to realities above you and below you.
Mhm.
Essentially, when we are attuning the body and the biofield toward health, happiness, peace, love, joy, you're essentially connecting to a maximum potential of yourself, which is fully fulfilled, has all their needs met, has a healthy relationship, has a comfortable living situation, does aligned work in their everyday life, does work that resonates with their soul. that reality exists, and we want to connect to that reality beyond time and space. So that's kind of like another high level way of looking at it is there's also lower versions of ourselves. There's the version of me in reality that could have picked up, say, meth, for example. Some of
Mhm.
my brothers back home who are raised with all the same bloodline, the same chiefs, the same spiritual leaders, the same DNA, the same chemical makeup, everything. But somewhere along the way, they were exposed to friends who did drugs,
Mm.
and they said, "Oh, I'll try it." And that was the difference between them going to prison and going south. Whereas for me, I had the luxury of being raised in the West Coast with my mother's family. So I was just exposed a little bit less to these different things that could have sent my reality south when my reality kind of headed upwards toward a happy, healthier place.
Mhm.
Um, so connecting with these higher selves and but the beauty of that is even if we do find ourselves in these lower planes of existence, we could always reverse it. And I remember there was times in my life when I was experiencing uh, hardships because I was still living in those lower planes, like a nine
Mhm.
to five job. And then I wrote down affirmations and I just repeated them every hour. And come to find out, those realities that I was trying to attract, they came about. It took them a little bit
Mm.
for the time lapse, but they did it did work. And so just a little bit of encouragement for all of us is that these things work. They actually do work. It's proven. There's no doubt about it that this stuff works. Um, with patience and implementation and incremental gains. So
W-
that's a awesome topic we could dive into.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Do you think that like when you talk about prayer or plant medicine, like some people think yeah, it's kind of like it's very hippie or it's like, um, common word I hear is like woo woo kind of stuff.
Mhm,
But do you think that those forms of ceremony, using master plants and using prayer is a vehicle or a way that we can attune the subconscious, like that we can use a ceremonial setting with the right people and the right tradition to visualize, manifest, or bring forward that higher version of ourselves, and at the same time give ourselves the healing that we need.
mhm. Oh yeah, that I would argue that that's all of everything we just talked about in terms of manifestation, in terms of, what some people would consider to be new age,
Mhm.
hippie spirituality, woo woo.
Yeah.
That ceremony and prayer is an advanced system for manifestation. And if you study ceremony, for example, it has all the elements of what a full manifestation program would have. For example, detox. That's like one of the key things is releasing all of the memories and the realities that aren't good for you, all the emotions that didn't serve this higher version of you. You're
Mm.
basically cleansing that out so that you can rewrite a better future. And when you put several minds together, for example, that increases the manifestation power. So, for example, I mentioned Moses being around other high frequency individuals.
Mhm.
Imagine being around 30 or 40 in a circle where you're all focusing on the same result, which is healing for my friend over here who's sitting in the sponsor seat, the person who was sponsoring the prayer.
Mhm.
All of us are going to focus our heart and our mind on his well being for 8 hours straight. And then not only that, but partaking in the elements, which is the sage, the cedar, the tobacco. We're partaking in the plant medicine. And we're ingesting all of these things and we're synchronizing with the plants. And I always use this example. So the tobacco, for example, or the plant medicine, they require the sun, the oxygen, the earth, and water. So when you ingest that and you're visualizing health, happiness, harmony, you're co-creating with the universe. You're basically you're basically making a guaranteed promise that that result it's gonna manifest. And so I would say prayer is just a way of explaining manifestation. because you're voicing your intentions as to what you want your life to be, and you're asking for guidance from these higher frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're essentially attuning to these beings of love, health, happiness, peace, joy. You're attuning to those things through prayer. And therefore, you're basically you're asking for that reality to come about on the physical plane. And so all of the elements of ceremony, that's a little bit more of what I touched on. Um, and I touched down on that in feathers and frequency, but I feel like as I'm thinking about it, I want to go in and kind of add a few more things because it's such a deep topic. And prayer is a form of manifestation. And when you look at New Age spirituality, they recognize indigenous people as having all of the proper tools for spirituality. Um, Hence why, in the 70s, why they called them hippies is because it was so new and they grow their hair long and they wanted to use psychedelics. Um, and they were trying to emulate, like wearing, like native garb and leather fringe, and it was hippie to them, but they understood that the indigenous people had it right. They had the manifestation practices right. Um, and so if you look at ceremony, that's exactly what it is you're manifesting a clear result. And when you look at like some of the recent movies that come out, they're starting to acknowledge that these indigenous cultures had the idea right. And I always talk about the movie Avatar, for example, when it first came out. So that would be like it's mythology. But if you look at all the principles, the people in who created that film, they understood that these indigenous people they had synced with the land. And so how they
Mm-hmm.
were syncing with the animals, they were syncing with the trees through their long hair. And that also ties into the concept of for feathers and frequency, because the hair has it's the longest hair on your body,
Mm-hmm.
but it grows long because it holds surface area, static charge, in order for us to receive intuitive downloads like an antenna. That's why your hair is so long. It's because it is like an antenna. Um, but it was a good sign that humanity was recognizing
Mm-hmm.
that this synchronization with the land, with the animals, was those were the good guys. Those were the people that we want to be like. They were the people we wanted to protect. And so it was a kind of a good sign of the times that humanity is recognizing that the indigenous people were the good guys,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to help us moving forward and doing this type of work. Knowing that the paradigm shift of the film industry, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is recognizing the collective consciousness of humankind all together is recognizing that we need to go back to this harmony with the land. But even in that part at the end of the movie where they're trying to heal one of the main characters, and she was laying on the ground by the tree, and they're all sitting together, and they're all in sync and in harmony, and they're all meditating and chanting, um, trying to manifest that healing, trying to synchronize with the divine, which was the earth and the universe, to focus on healing for that one individual. Like that's a perfect example of how these manifestation practices work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, that was like more of a romanticized, but
Mm-hmm.
that is the concepts were the same though as in ceremony, like you're saying, that is a way of manifestation.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the film world because I think about yeah, like my parents' generation, right? What they were watching in Hollywood, the Westerns, and the Indians, as they were called, were always portrayed as being the bad guys, and
Mm,
how that shift has happened so much where our generation is realizing the importance of coming back and respecting these cultures.
mhm,
The technology and the intelligence that's been harnessed over thousands of years that certain groups from around the world have lost, right? But there are certain indigenous groups, especially within the Americas and like Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of Africa, which they still hold that very strongly. So
mm,
um, yeah, I find it very like powerful and interesting what you're talking about this. Basically, going back to the first thing about like the hologram, like we're all just energy and we're able to emit energies in the way we want and kind of
mm,
shape our realities, help people, and it's a choice. We can we can use it for destruction or we can use it for good. And the same with
Hmm.
technology. We can use it for destruction, use it for good. Ceremony, the same. We can all just get in ceremony and just not do anything. Or we can use it for positive outcomes, be in service. So
Hmm.
yeah, I appreciate
Yes.
that teaching and sharing about that.
Hmm.
Um, wanted to talk about maybe the what you wanted to talk about before the meta crisis. If you wanted to
Hmm.
explain a bit more about that.
Yeah, so the meta crisis is important because the more that we could share this insight and the more that people can kind of pick these things up and use them and become more interested, the more that that meta crisis is going to be addressed. So the meta crisis, if you were to Google it, it's a multifaceted outcome of a deficiency. So it's the manifestation of a deficient philosophy. So if I didn't watch my health, that's a deficiency that's going to lead to my physical decline. If I didn't watch my thoughts over the course of time, what's going to occur is there's going to be problems that arise within my attitude that are going to manifest certain outcomes. So, for example, my relationships might keep falling apart because my mental dialogue, I'm always insecure and I'm always talking down on myself. But if I don't watch that mental process, it's going to lead to manifesting, broken relationships or problems. So whatever quadrant of my being is deficient, something is going to manifest lacking an element that's required for harmony.
Mm,
So the four parts of being, the mind, heart, body, and spirit. If I lack a spiritual understanding, something is going to manifest with a spiritual deficiency. And I would say that's where we are. Is because there's so much focus on physical gain, personal gain, and not enough acknowledgement of the spiritual quadrant. That's why we have these establishments and certain manifestations of just conquest for serving the one or serving the self.
mm,
So when colonization occurred in the Americas, for example, these these empires were conquesting these harmonious cultures
mhm,
and wanting to serve the one. They didn't want harmony with the land, the water, the earth, the plants, the animals. They wanted to serve the one. But if they had a little bit more of an intuitive insight, a little bit more of a spiritual balance within the mind, heart, body, and spirit, they would have gotten here and said, hey, look at these are our brothers. Like those are my kin, even though we're not related in terms of my family tree, but these are humans. If I talk to them, they're going to talk back. If I make a joke, they're going to smile back at me. We're all brothers and sisters.
mm,
But because there was that lack of that oneness, that spiritual quadrant, and they only were serving the body, which was what they could gain within the in terms of physical goods, money, whether it might be resources, whether it might be industry, they were trying to acquire any kind of riches for their physical gain. And so the meta crisis is a multifaceted deficiency
mhm,
in the planet, in our political constructs, our educational constructs, within media constructs, within relationships. A lot of us are coming from broken homes, and society is coming from this deficiency within the metaphysical quadrant. And as we move toward this technological renaissance where it's going to be exponentially increasing,
mm,
if we go into this digital AI advancement, so they're predicting technology to exponentially increase because of this cognitive amplifier, which is AI.
mhm,
We're going to be able to solve many problems that we wouldn't have been able to solve on our own. So my brain only has so much bandwidth, so much processing power. But if I have a cognitive amplifier, which is artificial intelligence, as my second brain, I could probably solve the problem of, say, food scarcity, for example.
mm,
If that's where my heart is, I could probably solve the problems of like space travel.
mhm,
Um, if I had this second powerful brain to use as a tool. But when we get So when we get to this technological advancement, technology is going to exponentially spike up exponentially. And if we still have that deficiency in the spiritual quadrant, it's just going to manifest into more physical gain, more self-serving life philosophies. But in a way to supplement that is to educate the world in spiritual principle, kinship with the land, attunement, wiring the brain for peace, love, health, happiness, promoting this men's work, healing communities, and if we're promoting spiritual healing, and if we're trying to provide modalities for the world to do that, when we get to this technology age and we have that deficiency addressed, which what we said a promising sign of that being addressed is in the media industry, they're starting to acknowledge more earth-based spiritual practices as something that's important. So
Hmm.
that's a good sign. If we could do more of that, when we get to this technological advancement, the tools are going to be as good as the hands that wield them. And that's the phrase that I've been repeating a lot. These tools that you see here are only as good as the hands that wield them. This voice that I'm using, I could use it to hurt somebody, hurt their feelings, or I could use it to heal somebody, depending on, like you said, it's just who's wielding the tool of the voice. And that's going to be the same with AI. AI is going to be as good as the hands that wield it.
Hmm.
If they're enlightened, they're going to use it to solve problems of the environment. If they're self-serving, they're going to use it to gain control, to gain conquest, more power. Um, so AI is a cognitive amplifier, and I think that's been my focus a lot lately in a lot of my talks, is because I explain why me creating these courses is so important, because I want more people to learn these things. But I also need to be able to take care of myself, and then that leads me to the five determining factors of solving this meta crisis. There's going to be five factors that play a part in this big puzzle. And so I already mentioned the cognitive amplifier. That's going to allow us to have higher processing power, higher brain power, which is artificial intelligence. That's one. It's going to be a determining factor in this meta crisis. Number two is going to be social media, because it's allowing for schools of thought to be global. So the Way of Life podcast is a school of thought. Heart Creators is a school of thought. Bobby Wade, Adrian, um, all of these spiritual creatives, those are schools of thought, and we're sharing from school to school via social media. So social media is breaking down the barriers of what we thought education was supposed to look like. 30 years ago, if you went to a university, that was a school. Today, you can up your phone, and that's a universe of knowledge of schools at your fingertips. That's number two, is going to be determining factor. Then number three is going to be cryptocurrency. So because we're able to make global exchange at any given moment, that doesn't put the power of currency in any one entity's hand. Cryptocurrency is going to allow for any one of us to make an exchange without having any blockages from U.S. currency, or whatever currency we choose to use.
Hmm.
So that's going to allow for more people to make instant exchange of resources. And then number three is gonna be remote work. Or so I used AI, social media, cryptocurrency. Number four is gonna be remote work. Remote work is gonna allow for people who are in impoverished areas to open up their phone and to be able to take care of themselves economically. Yeah, I might have a single mom in the res. She's gonna be able to sell arts and crafts from her phone. And if she chooses to learn more of these modern skills like this, she's going to be able to make her own school of thought, where people are going to want to support her in her work, her life's work, other mothers or other women folks, for example. So remote work is going to be a key determining factor, because we're going to be able to work from home and share knowledge across the planet. Wherever those our people are, we're going to be able to find them from home. We're not going to have to travel to find our spiritual friends and family, our spiritual family. They were going to be able to cross paths in the same way that me and you did through remote work. And then number five, they say, is going to be psychedelics, which is plant medicines. And the reason why is because they're developing ethical ways in which to use psychedelic transformation. So one big one is working veterans, for example, helping them to deal with like PTSD, for example, by using small microdoses of different psychedelics like psilocybin and helping them to process these things, PTSD.
Hmm.
And not only those kind of like controlled psychedelics, but also plant medicine ceremonies. So anybody who, and we don't need to distribute psychedelics across everybody in the whole population. We just need a select few people to be the um, pioneers of the psychedelic journey. So, for example, a guy like me and you, for example, would learn about these psychedelics and we would gather the lessons of what the plants want to teach us, take those lessons, replicate them, make them available through digital education platforms. And so that people who wanted to learn about synchronicity with the land, the plants, the animals would be able to learn the lessons that we learned by having meditated with these plants for years. And so that's essentially what I'm trying to do now is all the lessons that the plants have taught me, I'm trying to replicate those for people who wouldn't never get a chance to go use these plant medicines to learn the lessons that the plants have taught me.
Mm.
So essentially they wouldn't have to go through all the hours that I did because I'm just giving them this summary of what the lessons are, the principles. And kind of back to what I mentioned earlier in the conversation, as long as they had the foundations through these digital platforms, they
Hmm.
would have a good walkway of it as to get oriented on how to learn about nature, the animals, the plants, harmony with the natural world. They wouldn't have to use a plant medicine to do that. They would just need to know the core fundamentals of it.
Hmm.
So those five factors are going to determine um, the meta crisis, how it plays out. So if it plays out bad or if it plays out good, those few things are going to supplement that problem
Hmm.
through global consciousness.
Yeah.
So that's why this work is so important. That's why we're approaching this new age of man where knowledge is going to be readily available for the world. Um, and it's going to be a ongoing process. It's not going to be easy, but as long as each and every one of us fulfills our life path and life purpose through intuition, through the higher self, as long as every one of us does that, it doesn't matter if we speak to 100 people or if we just speak to one person. As long as we're doing the work that the universe had set out for us to do, like we're eventually going to get there to more harmonious systems.
Mm.
And humanity was always meant to evolve. Um, and so all of these things, those five factors of evolution are going to determine how fast we evolve in this next era. And
Hmm.
the last little asterisk note on this, and I say asterisk because we'll see how if this does happen. So they're predicting knowledge to be able to be instantly transferred. So if they implement these cognitive implants they're predicting to create these microchips that you can sync to your brain, and
Hmm.
if information could be instantly synced, that means there's going to be a generation, maybe our children, maybe our grandchildren, for example, where if they have these cognitive uh, um, chips, I could download your knowledge instantly and you could download mine instantly. So that means if I have a lot of spiritual knowledge, anybody across the world can instantly download it, meaning that humanity is going to exponentially grow. Like their consciousness is going to be
Hmm.
through the roof um, because of this technology. So that could so again, it could be used for good or it could be used for bad.
Yeah.
It could be used to solve the world's problems or it could be used to amplify the world's problems,
Mm.
depending on where we as humanity choose to go. Um, so that's just something I've been preaching a lot. I've been talking about that a lot
Yeah, it's a
lately.
it's a fine line, isn't it? Like when you're mentioning like plant medicine, something I see a lot is the exploitation, the improper use of like these plants, and it leads to sustainability issues with these
Mhm.
plants. And I think that if it's used in the correct setting with the correct practitioners. Maybe people only need one or two ceremonies to get the downloads that they need to then
Mm.
apply to the work or what you're saying. Like people who do extensive study with these plants can then kind of summarize everything and give it out, you know,
Yeah.
in a container form or, like on social media or stuff like that. But
Hmm.
yeah, these are a definite, like it's a fine line. Yeah,
Hmm.
crypto is social media, like everything. It's really that fine line that we have to walk.
Yes.
Balance. I think really a balance is so important as we've kind of been touching on the whole kind of podcast, the need for
Mm.
balance.
Hmm.
Um, I wanted to ask you about the work that you're currently offering. I know you've got this course on your community, Heart-Led Creators, which we'll put in the notes, and encourage people to go out and support Adrian and get his course. It's really cool. I've purchased a copy, and I've learned a lot about the use of feathers and this heart kind of brain connection. And
Hmm.
I wanted to touch on the other work that you're doing, like your mentoring work, your coaching work, like how you're helping people.
Hmm. Yes. So for a long time, I wasn't exactly sure on my sliver of the internet and how I could serve my people. And not to say that, we have to have one set group of people, but I felt like there were a lot of intuitive people out there in the world who I would consider to be people like me, I guess you could say, and people
Mm,
like yourself. And I felt like in the beginning of this online education space, I would follow advice from experts, but there was always something missing. And I always felt that I couldn't just use my spiritual understanding as something that's monetizable. So I racked my brain for years. I was like feeling like, well, I can't just be a spiritual consultant, although there is many out there. And I don't discredit people who monetize, say Reiki healing or spiritual life coach or whatever it might be. And I've heard, the term shaman being used. And there's, I've heard the term business shaman. So there's people out there who have businesses, but then they have a personal shaman, which I don't have any quarrel with that, but I've never felt quite aligned for me
mm,
to kind of like just do spirituality only. And so as I studied and studied, read a lot of books, took courses, it kind of flashed across the screen of my mind to solve my own problems and then to try to find a modern skill. So I was like, well, I could technically create a like a an understanding of a skill, get a good grasp of it, and then that could help people with that skill. And so that's when I started doing more online work, more writing, more building a digital ecosystem. And then, so then it occurred to me that I could feel really good about helping people with a modern skill and then synthesizing that with spirituality. And then it could be a really good, balanced, ethical way in which to provide a service or a one person business.
mm,
So, how I've been helping people lately is with that, weaving in the spiritual principles as needed, and weaving in the approach of earth-based spiritual practices that I've collected over my life experience of 19 years of leading ceremonies on my own. And prior to that 19-year mark, I was being coached by my father for most of my life.
mm,
All of that spiritual knowledge was refined from my forefathers to me. And then as I started to refine it, I started to document it. And I weave those spiritual principles into this online work, which is a modern skill, building a digital ecosystem, social media, digital communities, newsletter, content, cinematography, video, um, and building online offers. I weaved spirituality into that so that it felt more harmonious and more aligned. So that's what I've been helping people with lately is helping them to find ethical, aligned ways in which to be a spiritual person, but also provide a service that the world really needs. And then weaving in their spiritual principles into the modern skill. Um, on my bio, I have listed helping healers and guides and coaches handle their life's work with modern and ancient knowledge. Um, it's felt really aligned. It's felt really fulfilling. Um, and within that, certain healers and guides are at different phases. Some of them already have digital ecosystems, such as yourself. Some of them are just wanting to learn more of the earth-based spiritual practices in which to implement in their healing work. And so some of them just need more of different things. I've been providing kind of on a case-to-case basis, one-to-one guidance and knowledge that hasn't always been documented, and then kind of confirming it with spiritual knowledge. So, for example, an example of that would be synthesizing spiritual truths. So, for example, one of the spiritual truths is that we were born to serve others and to be fruitful. The life cycle of a apple tree comes from a seed of an idea, lays the roots. That's the first manifestations of your idea, and then when you pop up it out of the soil, out of the darkness into the light, that's where your modalities are starting to be noticed by the world.
Mm,
And then when you mature as a tree and you're implementing your ideas, so for example, a seed could be building a business, and then the stem of the tree is when you have these branches coming off, and that's when you have content manager or you have a life coach, and these are the branches off of your tree that could be your supervisors, your your business acquaintances. And then once that tree lays its branches out and then it starts to bear fruit and then the seeds are going to start dropping into the
mm,
soil, these are your sermons, your books that you write, your newsletters that you write, your podcast episodes. Those are the seeds from the fruit, replicated ideas. And that's what I meant earlier by, as a pioneer with plant medicine, we dive into this plant medicine world. But then when we come out of the plant medicine world, we have these seeds of knowledge that we're going to replicate and give to other people so that they didn't have to always go into the plant medicine world, but then they can learn these principles from just the river. They can learn these principles from the wind. They can learn these principles from nature walk, from
mm,
camping. Like you don't have to always use the plant medicine to learn what the plants have to teach you. Um, and so for me, that would be a universal principle that I embed into social media, which is being fruitful, replicating ideas, but following the life cycle of a plant.
mm,
So that's why I use the term pairing ancient and modern knowledge together so that it feels aligned and it feels harmonious. And you can track where you are on that and your station in life.
mhm,
And just kind of providing that spiritual support for people in terms of a modern skill. So that's what I've been helping people with lately. And thankfully, um, as I went along, more and more opportunities for this rose, in the same way that me and you started to work together.
yeah, yeah, I really recommend Adrian's work for people listening out there. Like, not only the the tech kind of part or the content creation or the strategy, but also bringing in spiritual part to it. Not, you mentioned before, like business shamans. And in my
Mm,
mind, I have this view of someone who's like moving something in reality so someone can get what they want, but they're not, the
mm,
person that wants it is not the one that's actually creating it. And I
hmm,
feel the work that you do is empowering the individual to be that form of creation, to bring forth
hmm,
the higher version of themselves and yeah, create the apple tree that they want in their life. So yeah,
mm,
I'll put in the notes as well some links to your socials, and if people want to reach out. And I know that you're super open, and you're very
mm.
welcoming to all people to reach out. And yeah,
Yes.
can't recommend you enough. I was going to ask, as I asked before, maybe you could we could finish this, kind of wrap this podcast up, or like collect all this word that we've been sharing with like a song, a
Yes.
traditional song, and then maybe if you have a final word that you wanted to share with people.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. With that, I'm gonna grab this drum real fast. Let me
Yeah,
see
go.
where I put it at. And that was another thing that I noticed was a lot of spiritual practitioners are incorporating the use of feathers into their healing work,
Mm,
incorporating the use of the drum. And as I look at it from an indigenous lens, we have our understanding of how these things are used. And I look at it as a win, because I look at it as humanity is intuitively being drawn to these things.
mm,
And so that's something that I wanted to add more material on and provide more instruction on. Mm, always promoting the importance of in-person work so that we can develop more authentic interactions with just being human.
mhm,
And I've noticed that people are using sage and using, things like sweetgrass and cedar, drums and feathers. And that was my foundation as to why I created feathers and frequency, is because I knew that people were going to be using these things anyways. So I figured I might as well try to provide a little bit of insight instead of the depth. Um, and that would be my final message as I sing my song, would be provide that depth for the world so that these things could be looked at as something to be respected,
mm,
something to be revered, and something to be used with the utmost thought and care and the utmost respect.
mm.
And that would be a perfect way to kind of end with after the song is kind of repeating that message out for the world, of they are definitely, we're all welcome to use these things, but as indigenous people, we would just encourage the amount of depth as to which they can be used so that it looks so that it doesn't look how it has looked in the past as, those are just hippies or those are just new age woo woo. It's like,
Yeah.
no, these are actually, there's a science to this stuff, and that's why we want to create that feeling.
Mm,
And so the song I wanted to share is a song that I sing a lot, and it's a mix of a contemporary style. It has ancient elements to it, great melody, but then it's giving thanks to the creator, and um, a song that we could be used in all occasions, could be used at home, it could be used at an event, it could be used in ceremony, and I've used it in a lot of different occasions, and that's why I like to use this song, is because there are songs that are appropriate to sing on a daily basis, but then there also are really, really powerful and intimate songs that should be only used for certain situations.
mhm.
Celebration songs, calling songs, and different styles of songs like that. So this is an everyday song that could be used for all different types of occasions. We are here, hey, oh, hey, ya, hi, hi, oh, hey, yeah, ya, hey, oh, hey, ya, hi, oh, hey, oh. Toka she la wa pe la ye la wa ai ya hey ya hai hai o ai ho we ya hey o hey ya hi hi oh hey hey oh hey hey ya ha hey oh hey hey oh hey ya hi hi oh hey hey oh so ka she la wo pi la ye lo hey oh hey hi, hi, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, hi, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. Oh. Listen.
Mm,
Just to close, I always had a great appreciation for my elders. When I looked at people like my father, for example, how they spoke, how they sang, how they carried themselves, I considered them to be professionals. I considered them to be PhDs in this way of life,
mm,
and how serious they took these modalities, the drum, the songs, the plant medicines. They took it so seriously. It was a lifestyle, and they wanted it to work for people. They wanted it to transcend time and space. So therefore, they put their heart and soul into it. And that would be my encouragement for themselves and my encouragement for each and every one who comes across this knowledge, that we should take things to heart with the utmost thought and care into it. If we ever find ourselves using a drum, if we ever find ourselves going to a plant medicine ceremony, if we ever find ourselves going into nature and making offering to the water, to the trees, to put a lot of thought into it, put a lot of effort into it. And even times when we feel like it's easier just to, you know, break bread with your family at dinner and to not stop and say a word of thank you to the creator.
mm,
To always stop and to be mindful about everything we do when we harvest food, maybe even going so far as to find a spring somewhere and communicate to the spring, tell the spring thank you for clean water, tell the mother earth thank you for pure food to eat, thank you for clean oxygen to breathe, thank you for sunshine, on an hourly basis or at least a daily basis, to acknowledge the elements and to communicate to them, have this kinship with them, because the level of care that you put into these practices is going to be the level that's reciprocated back to you. So if you're casual, then they're going to be casual in return. And I say this as a close because I meet a lot of people who come across indigenous healing practices, and on social media, sometimes we see these shaman, and I see some titles as saying Shaw woman and shaman and medicine man on different biographies on the social medias. And I think to myself, that's awesome. That's good. I
mm,
like it. But I've seen healers, I've seen medicine people who had communication with the spirits, and they didn't refer to themselves as being a shaman
mm,
or a Shaw woman. They didn't refer to themselves. Although if they used that title, they would have been correct. And I didn't see them refer to themselves as being a um a medicine man. They considered themselves to be vessels and helpers for the divine. And that difference between the humility and the level of care that they put into this, always understanding that we don't possess no knowledge as an individual, that it's the collective, that it's the synchronization with the elements, with the guides, with the holy people, with the great creator, the creator of all things, that is always, that's the credit that we should be paying homage to, is that we don't own any knowledge, we don't know it, we don't know anything. Any healing that takes place because of the divine nature of the universe and the creator. um but having that level of depth and care in everything that we do, acknowledging all of the elements, the foods that we eat, our friends, our family, our children, taking great care, um uh take great heed as to the the level of professionalism that these spiritual leaders took. Try to take notice, take heed of that, and try to emulate that level of care. And then is all of these things are going to work. The communities that we're building are going to work. They're going to do good in the world. They're going to last way beyond us. The books that we may write someday, the courses that we create, they're going to work for people because we're taking great care in what we do, a lot of thought behind it. Um, that way, when we encounter this meta crisis, we're going to make it through because just as well as you said, there's going to be counteractive forces out there. There's going to be things that are going to try to dim this light of the work that we're doing. But if we're really, really consistent, really, really disciplined with all of this, um, the prayer is going to make it through all of that. And so just encouragement to all of the medicine people out there, the online uh, light workers, the healers, the coaches, the guides out there. We're we're all kind of in this work together. So the more that we can support each other in that way, I think the better. Uh, Hence why we're doing this collaboration and hence why we're doing this work.
Mhm.
It's all going to lead to that at the end of the day. I wanted to close with that thought.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. I think that's a really, really important point to close with, and respect and listen to your elders, listen to where these traditions come from, and know that these people are walk with humility, and there's a lot to
Mhm,
learn there. So
mhm,
yeah, that's a good closing message, and want to give you thanks for coming on here and
mhm,
sharing your knowledge, being open to to share on the podcast on the way of life, and
mm.
yeah, like I said, for anyone listening, I'll put all this information in the podcast notes so that people can potentially get in contact with you that feel a call to do some work. And yeah, I look forward to future collaborations and future offerings from you. So thank you.
Yes, yes. Looking forward to more.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Somos la tierra, somos la vida, somos la luna, la estrella y el mar.